We are continuing our series of talks on the very, very important hot issue of Taliban's takeover in Afghanistan. If I'm not mistaken, exactly 1 month ago, Taliban has taken over in Kabul the power. Since then, we have seen reactions coming from the regional powers, neighbors, the global powers, and we are still in the process of developing the arena of the relationship of Taliban with the neighbors and the neighbors' reactions. We can talk a lot about the concerns of democratic community, international community, but the ones who are far away from the region. But the neighbors, the immediate neighbors are, I think, mostly concerned how Taliban will behave, how will it build its relationship with its neighbors, and how the things will develop in the future, in the nearest future, and in short term, in long term. Central Asia is watching closely the developments in Afghanistan, so we are very much pleased and honored to have with us today Mr. Gavin Helf, the senior expert at the U.S. Institute of Peace. And Mr. Gavin Helf is, before joining the U.S. Institute of Peace, worked as a senior democracy and governance advisor in the USAID Asia and Middle East bureaus covering democracy promotion and countering violent extremist portfolios. He also used to work with the USAID in Iraq, managing and helping design much of the democracy and governance, community peace building, and civilian assistance portfolios during the surge. It's important that Mr. Helf has studied, lived, and worked in the USSR and its successor states from 1984 to 2007. So he was a director for grant programs for the Eurasian Foundation, and he was a Central Asian Regional Director for the International Research and Exchange Board based in Almaty. So, Mr. Helf, welcome. Thank you very much for your time. I will stop here for just organizational issues. I just remind our auditorium that Mr. Gavin will make the introduction, his introductory remarks, and then it will be followed by the Q&A, by the questions. You are welcome to put here the questions. I have my own questions, but we will be you will be very much welcome. So I will stop here. Dear Gavin, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Yes, it's great to be with you guys today. I want to talk about three things quickly. One is how the countries in Central Asia themselves are reacting to the apparent takeover of the Taliban in Afghanistan. I want to talk about what the Taliban is doing and how they're acting towards the countries of Central Asia and Russia a little bit, because it's the same. And I want to talk a little bit about the geostrategic implications of the American withdrawal. So first of all, I think it's important to note, maybe unlike a lot of countries that are not close to the borders of Afghanistan, the countries of Central Asia are not freaking out. They're not running around like chickens with their head cut off. I think, the response in the United States somehow gets confused with ISIS. So they think, the Taliban are going to be just like ISIS, and they're going to be beheading women and journalists in the streets. The countries of Central Asia, and I've heard this, going back years from my partners in the region, they've lived with the Taliban already. They lived next door to the Taliban in the 1990s. You know, somehow you manage to figure out how to move things across the bridge. Somehow you manage to live with the neighbors that you have. Just like in a real house in a neighborhood, you know, when people who are your friends move out, and somebody else moves in, you learn to figure out how to live next door to them. So they're not afraid of the Taliban in that sense. That is also very much, they have received the reassurances of Russia under the CSTO and the OTKB, that there is no need to worry about the high intensity threat of, you know, anything strong coming over the border. The, you know, Stopirvaya Modestrekovaya is still located on the Tajik border after its relocation from Berlin in 1945. So, you know, the Russia has emphasized its commitment to maintaining the border of the Soviet Union with Afghanistan. So there's no sense that they're worried about a high intensity military threat. They're not really worried about the Taliban presenting a threat across the border, and they have to learn how to live with them. So that, you know, that's the first point. The second point is, given the way you know, things have developed in Central Asia, all of the governments of the region are either strongly autocratic or they are consolidated autocratic regimes. Unfortunately, that includes Kyrgyzstan, which used to be our island of democracy, has increasingly become an oligarchic and authoritarian regime. So, you know, none of these countries are particularly going to get themselves excited about NGOs or women's rights or LGBTQI rights. You know, they're perfectly happy following the Shanghai Organization principles of non-interference. So, you know, part of that entire philosophy is, you know, we're not here to tell you how to run things inside your country. We're here to organize our mutual relations. So they don't, I think, fear the Taliban in terms of what it's going to do to its own population. And neither are they particularly going to miss the Ghani Republic of Afghanistan government, which was corrupt, chaotic, democratic, and represented all the things that they don't particularly like as principles of governance. That's more of a concern for Europe, the United States, and the other democratic countries, but it's not really for the countries of Central Asia. So you know, if the countries of Central Asia can be guaranteed that nothing bad is going to creep over the river into Central Asia, and if they can be reassured that the Afghanistan will not become a source of problems for them, I think they're perfectly willing to accept a Taliban which does the minimal to comply with international human rights standards of behavior towards its own population. So that's sort of, you know, that's been, you know, very reinforced by Russia. The countries in the region, Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, the border countries have put you know, troops on the border. They've evacuated some of the civilian population. They've been very solid. I think the things that they worry about beyond security are issues of refugees, and you know, that's really the kind of uncontrollable threat from Afghanistan that they really worry about. So that's how the countries of the region have responded to this point. I want to talk a little bit about the Taliban, and I'm sure you must be somewhat aware, but the Taliban political office, even before, about a month before August 15th, started on a really phenomenal diplomatic charm offensive. They went to Ashgabat, they went to Tashkent, they went to Tehran, they went to Islamabad, Beijing, and Moscow, and they reassured all of the neighbors that Afghanistan will be a country that does not become a bad neighbor to its own neighbors, that Afghanistan will not become a place where insurgent groups or malcontents can find a place to stay. They reassured Russia that they would eliminate the cultivation of poppy and take on the drug trade, which my colleagues who work on Afghanistan say they can do that because they've got at least a year or two of supply in the warehouse, so they don't really have to actually grow right now. But they've made an effort. They reassured the countries of Central Asia that the co-ethnic insurgent groups that are Tajiks or Uzbeks, the IMU, ISIS, and Al Qaeda would not be able to use Afghanistan as an offshore base of operations for activities in Central Asia. The Taliban actually went as far in Beijing as reassuring them that they had no, this is a, theoretically Islamic extremist organization, the Taliban. They reassured the Chinese Communist Party that how they deal with the domestic terrorists in Xinjiang is completely an internal affair and has nothing to do, with them. So they were willing even to throw a fellow Muslim population under the genocide bus to reassure China that they would not be a problem. So I think the big question, certainly in the minds of the neighbors in the region, is can the Taliban in the Quetta Shura, can the Taliban in the political office, can the top leadership of the Taliban actually guarantee the behavior of, the men on the street in Kabul, but also, the Tajiks from Tajikistan across the border from Tajikistan who are affiliated with the Taliban because it's convenient? Can they ensure the behavior of the IMU? Can they actually, follow up and achieve some of this command and control that they have offered? And I think, most of the people I know who know a lot about the Taliban will tell you it's not nearly as organized as the Marine Corps or the Catholic Church. It is a loose coalition of warlords and local commanders. So we've already seen some signs that, despite the fact that they've promised that they're going to be nice to women, and despite the fact that they promised that they're going to let people have freedom of movement, and they're not going to sort of repeat some of the abusive practices of the 90s, there are already signs of a lack of command and control that may lead to some worrisome situations on the border. But it was very instructive, to me, that the first sign I had that the Taliban were going on the offensive is that they made a point of grabbing control of the border posts on the former Soviet border all across Central Asia. The first thing they did was they grabbed control of those border posts, which had been the source of opposition to them during the 1990s. The last thing I want to talk about is the geostrategic reshuffle that is in progress and will probably be the second thing worth watching. The first thing worth watching is whether the Taliban can actually deliver on their promises. The second thing worth watching is, there's been a great sense of deflation of the American role as they withdrew from Afghanistan. It's not just a matter of 2,500 troops on the ground in Afghanistan, but it's the sense that America is no longer the guarantor of the good behavior of Afghanistan. And America has been talking about being able to maintain a counterterrorism campaign with over the horizon response capabilities. A lot of those depend on places like Pakistan, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan to provide for that. And one of the things that's very clear is there's a sense in the region that America's gone. The American role as guarantor of stability in Afghanistan is over, and we've seen Russia very much step in. And I know I've had this, when I do the course here on Central Asia, I have to remind Georgians, Caucasians, and Ukrainians over and over again that Russia, the same Russia that is disruptive and believes in maintaining frozen conflicts in Georgia and the Caucasus, can act in Central Asia as a guarantor of stability, with the same foreign ministry and the same foreign minister at the same time, because they can perceive that as in their interests and a proper response to the threat that they see. So Russia has stepped in, and I would paraphrase the Russian position is no, they've been pushing the countries of Central Asia to not allow the United States to establish a military base foothold, to be able to use Central Asia for over-the-horizon military operations. Russia has largely sort of taken on the role of guaranteeing that they would provide the over-the-horizon military counterterrorism capabilities for the region, and they've guaranteed the border, and at least in terms of high-intensity military threats, the good behavior of Afghanistan vis-a-vis its northern neighbors. And they have very much pressurized the countries of the region to reject American attempts to find places to base our troops. That was just reemphasized today in an announcement by the CSTO countries led by Russia, the ODKB, which said two things. Number one, they agreed, and this is new in public, the countries of Central Asia agreed not to allow foreign military bases in Central Asia, which is basically directed at the United States. The second thing that they agreed on was they would not accept refugees from Afghanistan. And that is unfortunately, the policies of the region have been largely to turn people back. I think they're very much worried with the economic instability. It's more about the economic instability in Afghanistan, that large numbers will be seeking refuge in Tajikistan, Uzbekistan, and Turkmenistan, and the countries of the region have very much now received support from Russia to close those borders and not allow humanitarian refugee access, which makes sense given how strained those governments are coming out of COVID and having, sort of resource and humanitarian problems of their own. So I think, the two big things to watch are, can the Taliban deliver on the promises that it's made to its neighbors, number one, and number two, is it possible to stem the flow of refugees into Pakistan or northern neighbors or other neighbors? Those are the things that I'm trying to keep an eye on. So I think I'll stop there. That's 20 minutes. And I think I'll stop there, and happy to address any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Helf, for your very, very insightful observations and analysis of the process and developments in Afghanistan. You have touched upon a number of issues which I think we could dwell on individually. The individual states of Central Asia are building their relationship with Taliban differently. Tajikistan, which is hosting today and tomorrow the two summits, has a different position from Turkmenistan, from Uzbekistan, because of Tajik large minority in Afghanistan in its northern part, and in especially in the resistance movement in Panjshir Valley. Do you expect that President of Tajikistan, Emomali Rahmon, will play this card for improving its own position inside the country and within these security organizations to make its role more significant with regard to the Tajiks' participation in this resistance movement. And in this regard, do you also expect that there could be, in this or that form, United States coming back to Afghanistan, countering the international terrorism and extremism, and supporting the resistance movement in the Panjshir Valley and beyond the valley?
So that's sort of a question, are we watching the same movie that we were watching in the 1990s? It's like when you watch the latest Star Wars movie, you say, is this just going to be the same story? So I have a couple of things to say about that. One, I think Tajikistan is the country that is most worried. The Taliban that is across the border from Tajikistan includes Tajik opposition groups from Tajikistan, made up of people from Tajikistan. So I think, as they have a legitimate reason to be concerned and a legitimate reason to think that the Taliban maybe can't deliver on their promises compared to the other countries. So I think they're reacting out of fear. They have been very careful so far not to invoke the ethnic card in their rhetoric. So they don't talk about the folks across the border as fellow Tajiks. Now that's starting to show up in social media, but not in the official. Right. Officially, they say, oh, those are, Afghan citizens across the border. But they will point out that the militants across the border are, Tajiks that are hostile to the regime. So that's number one. And this is Rahman has been becoming increasingly dependent on nationalist and nativist, Tajik ethnic mobilization. For instance, you can read about this in stuff I've written, but the recent conflict with Kyrgyzstan was basically, Tajiks versus Kyrgyz. So ethnicity is playing more and more of a role in the internal politics of Central Asia. So he has every reason to sort of, play that card of the Tajiks across the border, but he's been very careful not to, and that tells you something. Secondly, there's a really, so everybody thinks, oh, you just get, the warlords back in northern Afghanistan, and you've got, opposition. There's a really big difference between Mr. Massoud Jr., who was trained in Massachusetts or something. He's had a different life than his father, Massoud, who was a famous mujahideen fighting against the Soviet army. So the combat capabilities of the groups in the Panjshir Valley aren't automatically transferred by ethnic affinity from generation to generation. And the Taliban has been effectively engaged in combat with the United States military for 20 years. So the balance of military skill may not be in the favor of the opposition in Panjshir Valley. So I see Tajikistan acting defensively right now, and if the 201st Motor Rifle Division and Russia and its guarantees can't fulfill those worries, then I actually think that they're really going to probably rely more on preventing penetration into Tajikistan using their own capabilities to intervene with small groups than they are to try to work something up in northern Afghanistan. So that's Tajikistan.
Now go to Turkmenistan.
Turkmenistan.
Turkmenistan and the Trans-Afghanistan, Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India pipeline.
Yeah.
Turkmenistan has a vital interest on having this pipeline as a balancing for the natural gas exports. But is it viable under the Taliban, under the Pakistan and India's confrontation, which was very, very clear and obvious in Afghanistan itself? Is it viable to have this project working in the nearest future?
I think that remains to be seen. We know that the Taliban can act in their interest economically when they want to. They did that last time they eradicated poppy cultivation. They were able to impose that. Right now, Turkmenistan is probably the country that is most fearful in military terms, because they don't have, Uzbekistan has a military that is capable of offensive military operations. So it has the one military that's actually, got a robust offensive capability in the region, and they can handle their own border. Thank you. Turkmenistan doesn't, and they put, as much military capacity on the border as they can, but they have largely been engaged in trying to negotiate with the Taliban, first on these security issues, and then I imagine we'll see them trying to reach out on security guarantees for these economic interests. But there is Turkmenistan has no problem dealing with whomever they can deal with that can provide the security and if it's in their economic benefit. Uzbekistan has been traditionally and currently the most forward-leaning in reaching out to the Taliban. They have been the first to engage. They have no problem. They will have no problem with recognition. Their interests and their thinking are very economic. So their response to instability, the Tashkent conference last month, was very much based on providing economic support and economic opportunity to Afghanistan. So Uzbekistan is really acting out of a position of pragmatic strength towards the Taliban. So again, it all comes down to can the Taliban deliver on promises that it makes to its neighbors, not only on security issues, but also on economic engagement. Are they a reasonably good long-term partner for TAPI and other sort of economic projects that might unfold?
You mentioned almost all the Central Asian states. Should Kazakhstan be nervous about Taliban's future activities in the region?
So Kazakhstan doesn't really have co-ethnic problems that the others do. There's not a Kazakh, diaspora or Kazakh co-ethnics in Afghanistan that they need to worry about. There are in Xinjiang, but not in Afghanistan. I think Kazakhstan feels very confident in its counterterrorism capabilities that have been very strongly developed since the last round of terrorist attack in Aktyabinsk a few years ago. And Kazakhstan has over the last decade had a plan to engage Afghanistan preemptively in economic development. I was somewhat involved when I worked for USAID in helping stand up KazAid, which is the Kazakh Agency for International Development, that looks to its primary mission is economic stabilization and student exchanges with Afghanistan. So I don't see Kazakhstan acting out of a sense of short-term fear. I think they're acting more medium to long-term sense of how do we contribute to stability in Afghanistan when we don't have a common border with them.
As I saw in the news, the primary concern of Kazakhs was the refugees that could get to Kazakhstan, and the Kazakhstan's leader, Hashim-Jomrat Tokayev, was one of the first who has initiated within the CSTO the joint response to the refusal of the acceptance of refugees from Afghanistan. You mentioned
it's really important. It's really important to understand that all of these countries are coming out of, a year and a half of extreme governance stress, and not unlike other countries in the world, but the countries of Central Asia had a hard time with COVID. And they're coming out of that, and they're really, I think, don't have the capacity to take on a major humanitarian refugee issue.
Turkish President Erdogan has addressed today the European EU leaders to provide the financial assistance to neighbors, he meant the Central Asian neighbors, to accept the refugees from Afghanistan, and at the same time,
I think I know why he would do that.
Turkey said that under the current economic situation, Turkey has no resources to have more refugees along with Syrian refugees to host the Afghan refugees in this country. But let's go back to the Taliban's promises. As Foreign Minister Lavrov of Russian Federation said, no one is in a hurry to recognize Taliban. As you very rightly mentioned, the first steps which we're hearing from and watching in Afghanistan, Taliban is not really ready to get all the promises done. And this is about the women's rights, about the human rights, and what was the most important, one of the most important, was the inclusive government. Russia was also insisting on the inclusiveness of the government. And on the other hand, Taliban is facing the looming humanitarian crisis. And they are urgently needing the financial assistance. They are asking for the financial assistance. They are getting some humanitarian assistance from China, from United States as well, as I saw in the news, but that's definitely not enough. Maybe that they have enough storage of poppy for 1 year, but they are urgently needing the financial resources. Having said that, do you expect that they will make the compromises in the nearest future to get the recognition from the regional leaders and the international community? And if this process is dragging in the time, then they may be tempted to spill over their victory on the Central Asian states. Maybe it's two questions in one.
So I want to put this in some perspective, right? China has stepped in and said that it would provide $30 million to support Afghanistan. Up until quite recently, the United States was providing $30 million a day to direct budget support to the government of President Ghani. That pays the wages of everybody in the military. It pays the wages of everybody in the bureaucracy and all the ministries and all the teachers and everybody. And that stopped. That is now ended. So I don't think, if I keep saying, if girls aren't in school in Afghanistan in a month, the Americans are going to say, oh, look, the Taliban hate women and they've excluded girls from school. More likely, the schools aren't open because there are no teachers, because there's no budget. So the impact of taking away the 75% or whatever it was, I think that's a number that's in my head. Don't hold me to it, but 75% of the economy of the country from direct support from outside, from NATO and the United States, taking that support away is going to lead to a massive economic crisis, no matter what. I think the United States is going to be focused on, first and foremost, are American citizens being allowed to leave, and are they being treated well? Are people who we say are at risk, the S1 visa holders that worked with us, and the people who were our partners over the last 20 years, are they being mistreated, or are they being allowed to leave on the Taliban side? That's what we're going to focus on. And then secondarily, because I think now the people who in the United States politically have an interest in Afghanistan are going to be those who are advocating for the role of women, the role of ethnic minorities, the role of non-governmental organizations. In the United States, the attitude towards the Taliban is very much going to center on this. Like I said before, I don't think that the governments of the region or Russia are going to build their policy based on how girls are treated in school. It may be a consideration, but it's not going to be their primary focus. So all that being said, I simply do not see a situation in which, if the Taliban suddenly decided that they were, left-wing liberal Democrats from Massachusetts and behaved that way, I still don't think, even if they maximally deliver on all of their promises, that we will go back to putting $30 million a year, or $30 million a day into supporting Afghanistan. I think the entire policy of the Biden administration is precedented on the reality that America now has other both foreign policy and domestic concerns, and the money that we were spending on Afghanistan over 20 years was sufficient to give them an opportunity to get control of their own affairs, and we are no longer going to bear that burden. So I don't see how any American re-engagement on development issues or humanitarian issues is going to be anywhere near adequate to replace the budget support that was there in the past.
Do you see China filling in the vacuum?
Not to that level. I mean, again, China found $30 million, so that covers August 16th.
Yeah.
What next? So I'm not an analyst of Afghanistan, but obviously I pay attention to it. But I would say, my biggest concern, regardless of the form of government or who's in power and how inclusive it is, how is Afghanistan going to deal with a 75% deflation in its income? That would be like cutting off Tajikistan from labor remittances. It's catastrophic for any country to lose that much of its income, and for everyone to lose their jobs in the state sector.
Yeah, which is 30% of GDP of Tajikistan, remittances coming from Russia. I think it will be really very hard for Afghanistan and for Taliban to get the assistance, immediate assistance of that level, not even close to that level which they were getting, which Afghanistan was getting from the United States.
So I imagine China will, would maybe be willing to pay a premium for security on its western border, but not that high. And then China will be interested in economic, to the extent that they can, guarantee the security of it, economic investment, investment in, rare earth minerals and lithium and other things that can be pulled out of, Afghanistan. But, there is, currently no superpower patron for Afghanistan as there was, when the Soviet Union was there, or when the United States and NATO were there. And we are entering another period. The famous movie in the United States about Afghanistan is a movie, good, you can watch it on the weekend, Charlie Wilson's War, which sort of talks about what happened at the end of the movie is, we had millions of dollars to buy Stinger missiles to shoot down Soviet helicopters, but we don't have $1 million to help them educate their students going forward. We're in a new period where Afghanistan really doesn't have that outside support and outside patron that it's had intermittently over the last 40 years.
Should we expect another Charlie Wilson in the Congress nowadays?
Well, now nobody. There
is no Charlie Wilson in nowadays.
The other experience I have similar to this is, what happened when the United States left Iraq, what happened in my childhood when the United States left Vietnam, and it's once the American troops are out, once the drama is over, I think Americans will forget very quickly, or they'll think about Afghanistan like Afghansi do in the Soviet Union. Afghanistan is stuck in some old 1986 vision of what it is. It's not the real country. I think it's going to be very hard to sustain the attention given all the other things that America has got to pay attention to now. There's a really strong feeling here, that I think it's important to remember that even though people aren't very happy with the way that the withdrawal of American troops went, an overwhelming majority of Americans support the policy of the Biden administration to leave Afghanistan and move on to other things.
You mentioned the new foreign policy priorities of Biden administration and possible redirection of the U.S. assistance resources to other countries and to other directions. Where should we expect this assistance would go?
That's hard to say now. It may be a reevaluation of, how much assistance. One of the things that's, I think, lost in the rhetoric is that, the Biden administration's foreign policy is not on a strategic level completely inconsistent with President Trump's foreign policy. There is a retraction of American engagement. And I think what the Biden administration talks about is focusing on the challenges of China and the challenges of Russia. The challenge of China is both economic and military. So I would expect to see, this is President Obama tried to pivot towards Asia in his foreign policy. President Trump tried to engage China and Asia with the Pacific Partnership. So it's, I think the poll is to have I would guess, and I'm not involved in this anymore, but I would guess that the assistance priorities are going to focus more on the independence of countries around China. So think about the opportunities there in places like the Philippines or Indonesia or others, Bangladesh, countries that need help in dealing with that Chinese thing as part of a larger strategic reorientation towards the threat that China poses in the 21st century.
Especially after the AUKUS pact was signed, the agreement between the three states, and China has criticized harshly the details of this pact and agreement, but we'll see that these intentions and attention will go into the totally different direction in upcoming years. Very last question. Everyone considers here in Georgia, there are a lot of speculations that withdrawal from Afghanistan is kind of a precedent for the countries getting the aid from the United States, that we have given you enough resources, we have given you enough time to develop your institutions, your country. So either you continue yourself developing your country, or we're out. There are concerns here in Georgia that the United States may make in the nearest future the same kind of decisions, something similar to what was decided in Afghanistan, if the things go in the same way which are going right now.
So I mentioned that Russia is capable of having a foreign policy that is different in the Baltic states, Ukraine, Caucasus, and Central Asia, all at the same time, based on what their strategic priorities and their sense of threat is. The United States is obviously similar. And I would say a de-emphasis of the conflict in the Middle East and Afghanistan in order to deal with the challenges of China and Russia may mean more of more emphasis on allies and friendly countries in the region facing Russia. So it could actually rebound, positively for Georgia, Ukraine, Baltic states, and others, depending on how that policy develops. So, I think it's impossible to generalize based on one case. I think that it could be a convenient explanation for why you were withdrawing support from one country, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to, I worked for USAID for 15 years. I understand that sometimes your decisions on international development also have something to do with what your largest security interests are. So, that's obvious in the case of Iraq and Afghanistan. So I think it doesn't necessarily follow based on the premise that you gave, but it remains to be seen. I am not privy to, sort of what the relative balance between the Russian threat and the Chinese threat are, but I would assume that part of dealing with the Russian threat would mean shoring up support with allies on Russia's border.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Helf, very much for your very, very interesting presentation and the Q&A session. I hope very much, I personally learned a lot about Central Asia and Taliban's future relationship, and we'll see how
I hope you know what to watch now, what to watch for.
For sure. So thank you very much. I hope very much that in future we will have the chance to ask you to continue the analysis of the things which will develop in Afghanistan. And I doubt very much that Taliban will start tomorrow building the democratic institutions and realizing their promises. But thank you once again. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Have a good weekend.
Same to you. Bye bye.